Hello, my name is Luis Roque with HIS Capital Group, and today we're going to break down our quarterly economic update in order to help you understand what is going on and how it affects our industry, the real estate industry, and also the lending industry. The main part that we're going to be focusing on is going to be the housing market, and that's going to be our emphasis. And primarily, we're going to be talking about what's going on with the new construction, why house prices are climbing, what's going on in the rental market with investments, and also with the mortgage industry. So we will look at the overall picture and also some of the examples of other markets and how they're reacting to the demand for housing. So this is the breakdown of the different topics we're going to talk about. As you guys know, we release a quarterly economic update, and this quarterly economic update um, includes a variety of topics. So we're not going to be covering every single topic of the economic report, but instead we're going to be focusing only in the housing market today. As I said, this is the third quarter release for 2017. And some of the different topics that we often cover in the release or in this update are listed right here, as you guys can see, and it's part of the magazine, part of the report that we produce every quarter. And so reports on the Fed and how the Federal Reserve and their policies affect our industry. What's going on with the job and wages market? How Mr. Trump's policies may have a positive or negative impact in our industry. What's going on with labor and employment? What's going on with GDP and inflation? And also what's going on with the average American consumer, right? So all those things are very important in order to understand a macroeconomic picture of the economy, but we are trying to bring it down to a micro level in the real estate industry. So, as you guys have probably seen before, we like to study the market cycles. We've studied the past 100 years, 150 years now, I would say, in the market cycles and what has happened in the real estate cycle in particularly. So, as it says here in the special note, the cycle does not tell you when to buy, it merely tells you how to buy within each stage. So, we have studied the cycles. We like studying the cycles in order to know where we are. And right now, a lot of good things are happening that allows us to predict where we are in the cycle. And based on what we're going to be talking about, we're going to show you how we are somewhere right here, somewhere in the middle of absorption and growth. And we have seen a full cycle in the past 12 years since 2006, where we were in the growth stage, reaching the peak. We actually reached the peak in 2007, late 2007, early 2008, and that's when interest rates continued to increase. At the time, there was a lot of construction. Population growth was not keeping up with construction, so there was a saturation of inventory, and that's when we noticed that a lot of properties started hitting the market. There were a lot of defaults in mortgages, a lot of foreclosures, a lot of short sales, and all of that, which took time. It took time to get to the bottom. It took about 4 years. Created the real bottom, which actually happened all the way in 2012. So, in comparison to the dark days of the stock market, which were in 2008, they happen overnight. The stock market can go from 0 to 60 in a blink of an eye. So you can lose it all from one day to another. And that happened to a lot of municipalities, a lot of hedge funds, a lot of pension funds. And these pension funds and municipalities that had all their capital, 401ks, they had all their capital allocated to mortgage-backed securities, the mortgage securities that were uh, um, the collateral for these sophisticated instruments, which were like stocks that were collateralized by mortgages, they started going bad. And when that happened, in the stock market, the impact was significant and it was overnight. In the real estate market, it took a couple years. It really took from 2008 to 2012 to really see the bottom of the market. And so that's a good thing in real estate. I mean, it does not happen overnight. And the good thing is, at the end of the day, if you can hold on, you could have an asset, right? Hopefully, it's not devaluated too much. But what we've seen in the past couple of years is that a lot of that negative equity has gone away. People that were able to hold on into their houses, they have equity now. So where we are right now, which is somewhere between absorption and growth, we've seen the beginning of the growth stages. And where we are right now is going to continue to climb. And the reason is because deregulation promotes speculation and advances asset price acceleration. What this is really saying is that the deregulation of industries promote the speculators or investors to come in and drop more money and invest. And what that does, it actually absorbs all the supply and creates demand. So prices go up. So whenever you deregulate an industry, it usually becomes more competitive. If you deregulate an industry, usually it becomes more affordable for everybody to participate, and it increases the demand because everybody is taking the limited supply. And right now we see that in the real estate industry for the past couple of years, we have a limited supply of inventory. So just to recap on the regulation, President Trump has made several comments regarding how he wants to deregulate the Dodd-Frank Act. And the Dodd-Frank Act is the one that in 2008, these two senators put the brakes on the lending industry and started becoming the police. They created the CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And uh, also, Donald Trump, with the Financial Choice Act, uh, has threatened to say, hey, I can change the leadership of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and ultimately I can put the brakes on them if they don't do they don't treat the economy and the industry in general how I believe it should be treated. I mean, it's kind of a catch-22. I mean, you do not want government intervention in when it comes to the economy, but at the same time, you need some intervention and protection in order for the markets to operate safely. And we've seen that regulation has put brakes on the industry, and then when deregulation happens, we see a lot of price acceleration or asset price acceleration. For example, you can see it right now in healthcare. Healthcare is being over-regulated. And in the past, since Obama promoted the Healthcare Act, or the Obamacare as they call it, the price for health insurance has actually gone up because it's over-regulated. And what Trump and others have actually said lately is that if we get rid of this over-regulation, it will make it more competitive because he'll bring in the speculators, and then it drops the price. Now, don't think that deregulation drops the price in real estate, because it doesn't work like that. It actually promotes uh, the competitiveness of the marketplace. And the way that it reflects in the real estate industry is by home prices going up. So I hope that makes sense. I don't want to over confuse it, but basically the economic update and the first couple pages, Mr. Sam Ali does a great job talking about all of these things, and giving it also a little bit of the political aspect of it. But we like to connect all of that to where we are in the real estate cycle. Um, to the next part of what we want to talk about is the housing market in general. Now, as many of you have seen, houses are starting to being built everywhere. Florida is booming with new housing projects everywhere. California, of course. But California, for example, one of the things that really catches my attention is the fact that we see a lot of these lofts or mixed use residential and commercial buildings, where also we see a lot of luxury um, complexes for condominiums. And what we've seen is that the millennials have other priorities versus where the baby boomers, for example, their American dream included a huge backyard, included maybe a pool and a single family home where they could entertain their guests. And millennials have different priorities. What we've seen is that they're more interested in maybe having amenities that they would not be able to have in their houses, and they want to be catered differently instead of having to do it all themselves. So what I'm talking about is that millennials are willing to sacrifice the square feet or floor area in their houses in exchange of amenities. So with what's going on in the health industry and how millennials are one of the groups that have participated the most in gym memberships and healthy habits, eating habits, what we see is that millennials are willing to moving to smaller places, and that may include a condo where they have a gymnasium in the complex. They may have a pool, a barbecue area. I've seen a lot of those here in Orange County, in particular, where there are even bowling alleys, and you have these rooftops with a pool and really cool places to hang out and lounge with your friends. And that's really what the millennial generations the millennial generation is looking for. They're looking for that entertainment that they would probably not have at their home. The millennials are really social, so they are willing to sacrifice the space, um, instead of having a bigger home for the amenities. But then that doesn't mean that prices are actually dropping. In fact, what the builders have done is they started adding all these amenities and making them part of these complexes, and you see a lot of communities being built with these crazy amenities in order to keep everybody within this compound. So uh, the medium house price throughout the country has actually increased. And what we see, for example, is that in October 2010, the bottom of the actually the of the recession, we could see the prices were at $204,000 for a median single family home, versus now it's almost $346,000. So that is a very significant increase in the median house price values. So but that doesn't mean that the homes are getting any bigger. In fact, like we said, they're getting smaller. So we need to understand those trends, because if we're looking to build, as right now we're looking to build a lot, especially in the next couple of years, our own projects, we're building new housing. We want to make sure that we understand what the trends are and what the consumers are looking for. And one of those things that we like to look at is the supply and demand. Because if we understand the competitors and what is going on, we want to be able to fulfill the demand for the buyers that and what they're looking for in housing. For example, back in 2006, when we were getting to the peak of the market, which was somewhere out here, we had 1.6 million homes built, and that's in 2006. So if you guys can see, from 2000 to 2006, 2000 is the net bubble. Okay, so we had an increase from 1.2 million homes all the way to 1.6 million homes in 6 years. Then what happened is population growth could not keep up with all these homes being built. In fact, in 2006, our population growth could only afford to have about 1.2 million homes built. So there was a surplus of 400,000 plus homes in the industry. So And then what happened is all these builders became very creative to offer incentives to buy for the consumers to come in and buy houses, and all of that, along with the increase in interest rates, created uh, part of the mess that we got into in late 2007. So now, if we fast forward to 2016, we are at 800,000 homes. And I think this year we're going to be roughly around the same, but our population growth can actually sustain about 1.4, 1.3, 1.4 million homes per year. So there's still a lot of opportunity for new homes to be built, and we will continue to see that throughout the country. And we will continue to see that with a lot of amenities, a lot of pools and gyms and places to entertain, as we are trying to attract the millennials to be part of the new home buyers. In fact, if we start looking at how millennials are forming their homes, we see that for a while the millennial generation became a little bit of a worry for most of us. And the reason is because they were taking longer to form their households. And as many of you know, um, most of us, I'm part of the Y generation. I got married when I was 23. By the time I was almost 24 and a half, 25, I already had my first child. Um, I don't know of many millennials that are 23 years old getting married and having a child by 24, unless it was by accident. Uh, my choice at the time was to get married. I had a stable job. I moved out of my parents right away. I went and rented an apartment with my wife when I was 23 years old. And then we bought our first home when I was 24 and had our kid by the time I was almost 25. So if we look at the millennials today, we can see that they are staying with their parents longer. They are not taking financial risks as previous generations, and that was a concern. But in the past couple of years, I think we're starting to see the formation of households within the millennials, which was a concern, like I said, for a lot of us, because most of them were not getting married. They were not willing to have kids. But I think it has taken longer for them to adapt. I think now most people are willing to get married after they're 30 years old, and maybe because we see all these promotions of everybody saying, "Oh, don't get married until you've parried, you actually partied out your your younger years." So most people want to get married until they're 30 or mid 30s. I've seen even some at their early 40s getting married. But part of that has also been the slowdown in the economy. But I believe that now, as more households are being formed, we're also going to be see this new construction, because that's part of the demand that's going to continue to absorb this housing. When it comes to rental properties, in the past couple of years, back in 2005 all the way through 2010, we would see vacancy rates increase significantly. And the reason is because from 2004, 2005, we had a lot of financial innovation. We had a lot of homes being purchased because lending was very, very flexible. So at the time, even if you were paying a couple $100 more to buy a house instead of renting, well, it actually made sense because part of that would be tax deductible. So you would actually end up paying less per year in your mortgage at the end of the year with your credits towards your income tax. And we continue to see that all the way into the boom in 2008, when everything actually busted, and the market crisis happened. Now we've been in a downhill trend in vacancies, and the reason is because a lot of this inventory was absorbed by the foreclosures. So what I mean by that is when the top of the market in 2007 um, was reached, everybody that started losing homes became a tenant. So only the few of us that had a couple rental properties were able to capitalize on that. But there were a lot of people that were homeowners and could not buy, even though they could afford it. there were no financial products for them in order to help them get into houses. So they had to become tenants. And even though it was very difficult to qualify, especially in Southern California, and I think throughout the nation, it was very difficult to qualify for a house for rent. I mean, there were so many credit requirements and deposit requirements that I have a couple of friends that were in the industry. They lost a couple of homes and they had to go rent, and it became very, very difficult for them to qualify to rent a house. But because there was no financial innovation, Wall Street was super afraid of real estate. Money was held back in the banks and it was not touching the markets. So that's why we saw that vacancy started to decrease. But now I think all of that is going to reverse quite a bit because the millennials are starting to participate in the housing market, and we are actually looking at the fact that there's going to be less homes for rent and more acquisitions as we continue to see more financial innovation and more mortgage products hitting the market. Now, when it comes to the investment arena, residential investments and flips, this is a $19 trillion industry. It is huge. It's incredible the amount of transactions that are happening in the United States, and we've seen the decrease trend that happened in residential investments because, well, same thing as with rentals. There was no money. Even hard money lending was difficult at the time. So now you scream hard money and you have 10 offers of different lenders trying to aggressively attract you to come in and get their mortgage programs. But the reality is that residential investments are not yet to where we are expecting them to be. I think that now, as more inventory starts to touch the market, um, these properties are going to continue to be absorbed. But right now, we have a lot of investors picking up um, all this inventory and a lot of competition with the limited amount of supply in real estate inventory hitting the markets. So that's another area that we get into with this quarterly update. Another point here is the houses for sale. Um, Sam and our economists really do get into this area, and I like what they do here because the amount of houses for sale versus the actual houses sold is a very important ratio that we look at because that tells us the what's going on in regards to activity. For example, that represents also if I am buying and selling homes and flipping, how many days on the market I'm going to be stuck with this property. So I want to see, well, how many houses were listed in the MLS last month and how many actually sold within that last month. And that would give us certain triggers. Now, in order to determine what to project for. But then also we see the home ownership rate. And home ownership has decreased over the past couple of years, primarily because of foreclosures. A lot of these creative mortgages that were originated back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, were short-term mortgages fixed only for a couple of years. So once those rates expired and became variable and rates started to increase, mortgage payments increased and borrowers could not afford them. Then we had a increase in unemployment, and that's why we had a surge of foreclosures. So home ownership continued to decrease, but then on the other hand, we had rental properties and rental vacancies decreased as well because there were more renters absorbing all of these properties being rented. So home ownership um, continued to increase, but now we're starting to see the increase. And the reason for this increase right here is because banks are starting to become flexible again. We're starting just, and I really believe that we're just at the beginning of this. We're starting to see more creative programs and products that will help consumers buy their homes. Um, I was talking to a friend of mine over at dinner a couple of days ago. He was telling me that a new program for consumers to get into a mortgage by just having a verification of employment, as long as they had 20% down, was coming up. You would never even hear of this a couple of months ago. Definitely not a couple of years ago. Now we have programs as well that qualify consumers that are self-employed, and that maybe they're self-employed, but they do not have their tax returns or pay stubs or W-2s or 1099s to prove their income. So what these lenders do sometimes is we could qualify them based on their bank statements. We look at the 24 months bank statements and calculate their ability to repay the mortgage based on the income or the deposits into their bank accounts. And if they're self-employed, I mean, we understand that they actually have the money, but sometimes they don't report the right amounts to the IRS. So all these programs and products are coming back. Now, it doesn't mean that we are doing 100% financing or all those ninja loans that were available back in 2006, 2005. Most of these loans still require a large down payment. So that's why I'm saying that still this is just the very beginning. But Wall Street has a very, very short memory. And as these products become more normal in the industry, Wall Street will continue to absorb that and will have a huge appetite for that, which we already see as private lenders. We have hedge funds and multiple private equity groups approaching us to buy our debt, versus before we had to be reaching everywhere for these groups to buy our debt. So now they're coming to us, and those activities will create more creative programs and more creative loan products that will make it more affordable for consumers to buy houses. So where are we right now? I mean, like I said, we're at the beginning. We will get here. And that's a fact. We will get to the top of home ownership rate again. And the reason is because, again, all these creative programs come into the market. So once you start seeing 95% stated income or all those super creative and risky products, run, because that's probably going to be the tip of the market. We're still seeing that, hey, if you have 20, 25% down payment and you go into a loan where you can show me that you make the money on your bank statements, I mean, the reality is you're probably going to pay your mortgage. And most of these mortgages are 30-year fixed anyway. It's not like if they're interest only for 2 years and then we're financing you 90% of the value or 95. It's not happening yet. So that's why we still have plenty of room for all of that creativity. But it could really, really fast. It could be as fast as 2 years where all of these changes. But I think we have a couple of years. So anyway, so that's really what's happening when it comes to housing and getting back into the growth. We've seen the year over year growth in housing all the way back since 2012. Like I said, 2012 was truly the bottom of the market. If you guys can see here, this is the slowdown from 2008 all the way down to 2012. It was the slowest timing in the real estate market. These were the dark years 2011, 2012 in real estate, because there was no money. It was very difficult. There was blood in the streets, but only those that had ability to purchase were able to purchase. And I can tell you, we bought some of our best projects in those years that we still have. So now, what is happening? Well, yeah, we can see year over year growth. Now, this doesn't mean that we're at the top of the market. This only means that we have seen a growth in patterns of real estate prices going up and up and up, right? So this doesn't mean that we're at the tip yet. It only means that the percentage of housing markets that have grown year over year will continue to grow. Okay, and this is as of December 2016, and I think we're still gonna continue seeing the same trends. When it comes to mortgages, like I said, financial innovation is really key. I really look at financial innovation. Interest rates do have an impact, but the financial innovation is more of an impact when it comes to housing. And the reason is very simple. Uh, I'll tell you, if you have a 7% interest rate, an 8% interest rate, but you can get into a house with less down payment and easier requirements, consumers will jump over that instead of having a 4.75 interest rate on an FHA loan with a list of 150 requirements that will probably fall apart on the 89th day of your transaction, out of the 90 days that it will take to close it, and then basically get the loan declined at the 11th hour. So all of that has happened with consumer lending. FHA loans and conventional loans are still very strict, and the reason is because Wall Street is and the government, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, are still buying these mortgages and these securities. So they still haven't fully forgotten what has happened in the past. So rates are not as important as financial creativity. Now, that's not to say the rates are not important. Yes, they're important, but people were buying houses left and right when the rates were double digits in the 90s. I remember one of my uncles bought a really nice house. It was like $500,000 at the time, and rates I think were like 14%. And but again, rates represent an impact to your affordability. For example, 1% increase in rates will impact your purchasing power by 10%. So what that means is, if today I'm buying a house for 300,000 and I wait a week and my rate goes up by 1 point, now that represents a 10% shortage on my purchasing power. It is pretty much the same as if I was to buy a $330,000 mortgage with the rate that I was getting today. So that 1% increase is 10% increase or decrease to my purchasing power. So it is pretty significant. But most people will say, I'll rather just pay that extra right now if I can afford it, as long as I can get into the house price, lock in my house price, and later on refinancing. But the reality is people cannot participate because the financial innovation is not all there. If you were to talk to anybody and ask them, hey, if you could get into a mortgage at 8% with very little down payment, would you do it? I can guarantee you that everybody will tell you yes. Uh, it is risky, but what I'm trying to explain is that the biggest impact is really the things that are not rational. And although sometimes um, um, being creative may be positive for the industry, this creativity creates the irrational market that will ultimately create the same conditions for the boom and bust that we've seen in the past. Okay. Um, Lastly, here in the big markets, in this update, we talk about the general markets and the bigger markets in the metropolitan areas that are growing. And we talk about Atlanta, we see Chicago there, we see some cities in Florida, um, Oregon, Washington. So, for example, here we also see Long Beach and Santa Ana. So this basically shows you the trends of what's happening in the 20 biggest metropolitan areas in regards to house prices. So as you've seen, in some areas we have surpassed 2007 levels. For example, Orange County, I think we just reached $720,000 as our median house price, and that is almost the same, if not above 2006, 2007 levels. But that doesn't really mean anything because uh, at the same time, the state has approved minimum wages to increase to $15 over the next couple of years. So the impact of that is going to have a direct impact in consumer participation in the real estate industry. So that is something just to keep an eye out. So anyway, well, that's pretty much it for the economic update. I hope this is helpful. Go through the updates, and we're going to continue to break down some of these different sections that we talk about in the economic update. Right now we only touch base on the housing market, but we can break down the rest, and we're going to break them down so that you can understand how to read this report and be up to date. And So feel free to reach out to us, info@hiscapitalgroup.com, and let us know what you think about these reports. Thank you for listening, and this is Luis Roque with HIS Capital Group. Bye bye.